conflict, politics, military-industrial complex, technology, war. The Flash Traffic Podcast.
So do you think a lot of Ukrainians are big Trump fans right now?
Oh, that's a good question to start with. Wow. Where do we go? No, I mean, I'd probably start with the fact that I do work with a lot of the people and locals. I currently live in Dnipro. My family are Ukrainian, so I do get a sense on the ground, and generally the consensus is there's not much trust for the Trump administration at all. I mean, there's obviously a barrier of news. When you go out of Ukraine, you get one sort of news. When you're in Ukraine, you get another sort of news, and nothing's been really projected in the media that gives any Ukrainian positivity. And so generally, I don't think there's much trust, and people are unsure. And obviously, Trump's regurgitating of Kremlin narratives up until recently really did worry a lot of Ukrainians, essentially. And we have a lot of Americans out here who support. We know there's a lot of support for Ukraine. So part of what I do is talk to them about the big picture outside of Ukraine, because they get a sort of a shielded view with the media. But yeah, I mean it's Trump, isn't it? So we have to deal with those. He seems to shift from one view to another depending on the last person he talked to. So I definitely, the people he sent here, including Steve Witkoff, who's got no diplomatic experience, really did sort of show Ukrainians how much real effort that they put into this, which was very poorly managed, badly run, and certainly a lot of pressure was put on Ukraine rather than Russia, which left a nasty sour taste in people's mouths here. But we can't America bash it. It's definitely Europe needs to do more, step up, and I've been a big advocate, and Trump was right all those years ago about NATO needs to spend more on its defense, and I've been saying that for years.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I try to explain to people in Ukraine or Eastern Europe when I go there is that American politics is winner take all. So whoever wins the presidency or the House or the Senate, that's a winner take all scenario. There's no forming of governments. There's no sharing of governmental power. So it gives the impression that, okay, now America is completely, pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian, overnight, because of the system that we're under, where now complete power is pretty much given over to the Republicans and Trump. But that's not the case, because still almost 50% of America is Democrats and primarily pro-Ukrainian. Even the Republicans, there's a lot of Republicans that are pro-Ukraine. So, if I were to try to explain that, which I will when I go back to Ukraine this summer, I'll try to, get that across to everybody.
It's a difficult one. I have the same thing with Brexit, unfortunately. It's like, we'll try. Why did the UK have Brexit? And I was like, we thought out. My personal view, it's the best Russian success story ever, at the moment. So it is an odd one when you come in, you have to explain. And I've had to learn a lot about American politics too, because, we had Putin that sort of took the air out of the room 12 hours a day, and we had a break overnight, but now we've got Trump and Putin. It's 24 hours a day, so if it isn't Putin taking the oxygen out of the room, it's now Trump. So it's very difficult to manage.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can't take you can't listen to everything Trump says, because, like you said, he listens to the last person he talked to, and that's his current opinion on whatever it is. So he's not he's not strategic. He's not planning out how he's going to end the war. He's not planning out how he's going to defeat Iran or any of this. He's just, hey, I'm shooting from the hip. We'll go with the flow, and it makes it very painful for everybody.
That is an understatement. Yeah, I mean it's people's lives here. That's the problem. It's the peace talks in February. I went quite openly saying it's not going to work. You only have to spend a few hours in Ukraine to realize the hatred for Russia and the fact that even the best you could do would be a defense force. It won't be peace because Russia will continue with its clandestine forces at FSB and try and overthrow it politically. And they don't stick to any agreements anyway. His sole goal, and he's been saying this since the start, is to take Kiev, to his words, denazify the regime, which has largely been debunked. You know, we've got a Jewish president, we've got an Islamic defense minister. You know, it's probably it's one of the biggest Jewish communities outside of Israel and America in Ukraine. I mean, it's phenomenally debunked. But you know, part of what I do is dispel those narratives because I live here and I'm on the ground, so I'm able to sort of tackle that within the media. And media is not my thing. I used to be in the military, so I saw it under the radar of any media, but I understand the value of social media and what we need to project and sort of dispel those rumors. So that's why I'm here.
So would you say there's not a lot of optimism right now on getting a peace negotiation complete?
Well, I mean, that's twofold, really. Let me start. The general consensus here is there's still the will to fight, and people are still you know, I take casualties off the front lines, and when I speak to them, some of those are in horrendous conditions. Some want to go back and fight. Some are still angry. Some want to tell you the progress they're making to X. They're generally pretty chipper when you know, and I've seen some horrendous injuries, but they've generally know that if they lose it, it's going to be far worse for them. I mean, if they don't fight, Russia comes in, that's me gone. You won't see me again. I'll be imprisoned again, and you know, a lot of Westerners will just go missing, and Russia will just come in and we'll go back to the torture chambers and the filtration camps that are reminiscent of, you know, 1945 and the Nazis. You know, it's just horrendous. So I'm able to talk about that with a unique view, being captured, being held by the Russians for several months. So I'm able to talk about that. On that side of it. So you know, that old adage about fighting for the love behind you, not the enemy really at the front, you're fighting for the love behind, is generally why Ukraine's innovations in their fight and generally why Russia have lost 30% since 2022 of Ukraine, why they've lost dominance of the Black Sea. I mean, Ukraine is holding its own. You know, it'll be Ukrainian troops training Russians eventually, training NATO eventually. So, you know, they're making those innovations here and building to defend the sovereignty of Ukraine. And yes, Russia make 200 meters or a kilometer, and it makes mainstream news. Yet, you know, we do something like regain dominance. Stop Russia's dominance of the Black Sea and sink over 30% of the Black Sea fleet, and it doesn't make the same media. So generally, we've got no choice to fight, and we don't want to be ripped off in Ukraine with a dodgy deal. You know, Trump's rhetoric about, you know, giving Crimea to Russia is just unbelievable, and you know, he says it, he doesn't realize how that has an effect here. Elon's pulling of humanitarian aid has had a detrimental effect here because, you know, it's the humanitarian aid that Britain, America, and all the Western countries supply to Ukraine keeps the stitching together and the fabric together on the front lines. If you take away, that's only aid in Russia. It's not helping Ukraine, and a lot of the communities on the front lines rely upon that money that they get from foreign aid and jobs and demining and projects, humanitarian aid projects on the front lines. So all those people that are working there now have to go and find other jobs. So everything, since Trump's come into power has been against Ukraine. Nothing has really, Ukrainians see no concessions being placed on Putin, no pro-Ukrainian media or rhetoric being spoken about by Trump's administration. Totally the opposite. So, no really Ukrainian has really expects the peace deal. And I said this in February, it's just not going to happen. So there are many aspects to it that probably don't get into the media, why we feel that there's going to be no peace. Because I think as well, to add to that, the West has really lost sight of what Russia is with its infatuation in the Middle East. So, I think generally the West is struggling. The military in 2022 was probably, because I speak to NATO troops, I work with the Americans, the Brits, talking about my experiences, and their consensus was they were going to come to train Ukrainians, but in 3 years that started to do a U-turn. Now it's Ukrainians training NATO, and a lot of Interflex and those operations where they were training soldiers. The soldiers were coming back and saying they just don't understand what it's like here. They don't understand the environment we're fighting in, because they were so driven by NATO doctrine and NATO standards that, part of my job now is I go back and say, we don't fight in the same way in Ukraine, yet we still regained 30% of the country after the initial invasion. And look at what we've just done this last week with sea babies being mounted with surface-to-air missiles and taking out jets and, coming out of Crimea. So, it's just phenomenal, the underreporting of the successes of Ukraine and the lack of backing and the slow drip feeding of weapons and the slow, European stance on it as well, still. Ukrainians will keep fighting, whether they're fighting with sticks and stones, they will still keep fighting because they're fighting for their lives.
Do you think they're going to try to mount an offense sometime this summer, the Ukrainians? Or do you think they have just resolved now at this point to use drones in the defense?
No, look at Kursk. You can't underestimate Ukrainians. Their OPSEC is generally pretty good on operations, which is amazing. There's a sense that they're starting to get the momentum here, and getting it back, which is very hard to do. And it is, look at what they've just done this week with the longest drone flew something like 3,000 kilometers into Russia. Russia's really exposed itself. So I think Ukrainians are very good at seeing that Russia is totally exposed. And Putin, his foreign policy has been a disaster from the word go, because what he's done is totally expose all of Russia's flaws, and the whole world's watching this. And he's resulted in recent weeks to more terrorist activities. So he's bombing hospitals, schools. My city of Dnipro is constantly attacked with ballistics and drones. Just this week we had 2 cruise missiles coming to Kiev. And they're not hitting military facilities, they're hitting residential areas and hospitals, because I think they're at a limit. It's very, he seems pretty desperate at the moment, Putin, to get a goal. We've got to remember, in over 3 years of fighting, Russia hasn't taken one single full blast. Is he going to be happy with the outer rims? Is he going to be happy with just Mariupol? No, he's going to try and push on regardless. And with the economy the way it is, and 40% of it now going on the war, is he in a position to stop it? So his economy is now straining. So there's a lot of variables here where we just, on top of what Trump's saying, just doesn't look like there's going to be peace.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Ukraine should attack the parade tomorrow? Do you think they should use long-range drones and blow up Putin's parade?
If you have a build-up of military, you started the war, and you want to call a ceasefire because it's inconvenient. And if you have a job lot of military that's grouped together. Would you not do that? Um, just 2 days ago or last night, Russia and Putin attacked Kiev and hit a residential building with a missile. So I think it's pretty hypocritical to sort of declare a ceasefire when you feel like it, when it's inconvenient, when you've started the war. So I think a military build-up, it's down to Putin to guarantee security of anybody who invites into the country. He started the war. I think if you've got a build-up of troops, I think, it's fair game in my view.
Yeah, I guess they just have to prevent killing Xi Jinping if he's actually there. It's not some kind of
absolutely
Winnie the Pooh body double. Yeah. Other than that, okay. So let's say there is an armistice or a ceasefire that lasts longer than 3 days. Let's say we go to some kind of armistice. You fought in the Donbass before the full scale invasion. Do you think it's going to be similar to that for a while if we do have a ceasefire along the current front?
I think at the moment, the only person that benefits from a ceasefire on frozen lines as they are now is Putin. He's already announced, 160,000 troops, which is a record amount of conscripts he wants to take in. He wants to rebuild his military. It's fatiguing. All the advances have slowed down considerably. The attacks have slowed down considerably. So he's resorting to ballistic missiles and Shahed drones now more. Even the artillery has slowed down considerably for a number of reasons. One, units to be able to fire them with. Barrels are fracturing. The logistics are being hit. They're really struggling with logistics. So they're using more drones, which are easy to transport, and they're also using the drones to drop in chemical weapons, which is increased, which is really disturbing. So, using chloropicrine and riot agents, and some reports of cases of blistering agents and things like that. So it is. He's desperate now, and he's going to use whatever weapons he can use now to get the job done. So it is worrying here. We've seen an upsurge in chemical attacks and the desperation. So I think, the Ukrainians would be able to mount an operation. They're far better at it. They're far better at combined arms. They're now using combined arms with drones, where the Russians are struggling to use combined arms. They haven't changed much in those sorts of tactics since the start of the war. Where they are strong on is people. They've got more people, and also fiber optic drones. They've increased the production of those, and they were ahead of the game there. So, but on the flip side of it, Ukraine's now really building its own ballistic missiles, its own drone capability, and less reliance on people like America and Europe. But, we could even buy Patriot systems off Trump. So, again, that's another thing that puts real doubt in your mind whether or not Trump's committed to peace, and Putin's definitely not committed to peace, as I sit here in Ukraine now. Because I might as well tell you, I'm in Kiev, so that's where I'm talking to you from.
What you mentioned, the personnel issue, is that frustrating, or do Ukrainians are they okay with the lack of troops at the front line, I guess, for a better term?
It's twofold, because one, my own personal view is the mobilisation's been a bit of a dog's dinner, a bit of a talking point since the start of the war. So there is that. We've also got the fact that people were fighting before the full-scale invasion and are still there now fighting. So, those guys need a break and relief. So when you talk to people in the cities and the towns, generally the feeling you get is quite mixed. People want to know they're fighting. People have got a lot of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. They understand what they're fighting for here, which is different to maybe Russians who are now fighting here on the front line and dying in their droves. So, there's the narrative, Putin's got the firm narrative in Russia, the Nazi regime and this whole ceasefire, this Victory Day weekend is really a propaganda-driven exercise to try and get more troops rallied around his cause, which is, fighting the Nazis, fighting NATO, and the West, which is far from the case. He invaded. There are no, it's not a Nazi regime in Ukraine. It's far from it. The whole ceasefire is geared up around war and raising the spirits of internally for Russia. So you only have to live or be in Ukraine for a week, and you know that this is the case. So I don't hold much hope for a ceasefire, to be fair. I hope I'm proven wrong, and I hope it sorts itself out. Most Ukrainians they've always wanted peace. They don't want to be in this situation. They're certainly tired, and everybody knows someone that's been injured or killed or as a POW or is fighting on the front line. So, again, Ukraine never invaded anybody. It wasn't in a position to invade Russia 3 years ago. So I can't see. There's got to be a want for peace, and Putin just doesn't want peace. He wants Kiev, and that's it.
Do you think it was a political issue? Do you think it's a political issue with the lack of mobilization with Ukrainians? Because I think everybody admits on both the Ukrainians and admit that, yes, we need more people fighting in the front lines. Is it a purely political thing that they can't?
I mean, initially he wanted the younger generation to keep, he recruited the older generation, and a lot of the dads wanted to fight so their kids had lives. And, as the war's going on, you need young men to do that. I mean, they are coming in. There's not a shortage of fighting age males from 25. If you come here, you'll see them in Kiev, the sounds, the cities. I mean, there's not a shortage of people still, but they're doing their best. You can argue the case of whether it was a good decision to recruit older people to do the fighting and not recruit anybody under 25. Personally, I would have recruited everybody from 18 to 60 because, some of those people would have had experience. Some of those people would have gone for officer training. You could have filtered people into specialist roles, combat engineers, drone operators. And most of those wouldn't have been fighting for 3 or 4 years anyway, and probably may not still be fighting, but at least they would have had some sort of military experience. And they wouldn't have gone in, as we say, green or new. So it is a bone of contention here, but we did what we did. But we're still here. We still liberated 30% of the country. We're the first country to invade a nuclear power and not get nuked. So it is a bone of contention here, but we're still doing it. We're still going. There is like I said, the issue with people want their husbands home. They've done their time, but many of the guys, when they get the chance to go home, don't want to leave the front lines because they know the people coming in don't understand the situation here. So, so they want to train and help the guys that are new coming in to give them some training and some battle experience before they leave. So, and you've got a lot of injured, go back and fight because they want to go back and defend their homes, get their land back. But yeah, don't be surprised if I've been saying it for 3 years. I've been saying it before the full-scale invasion. We're not the same army as we were 3 years before the full-scale invasion. I mean, we were a totally different army by the time Russia invaded. And I was saying it then, and I'm saying it now. Don't underestimate it. They'll come up with something new, some other way. It's very difficult the longer it goes on to take ground. And obviously, my home is Mariupol, so it's going to be very difficult to get that back with all the defense positions that they've put in. But the Ukrainians have gone into Belgorod this last few weeks again and embarrassed Putin again and moving into there. So Russia's really logistically very bad at the moment and struggling itself.
That's interesting. You mentioned it's not the same army as it was in 2022, because I honestly, I say this too, just from my experience and what I've seen in Ukraine, and our chairman, our former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, said this all the time, that it was a small Soviet army fighting a large Soviet army. And when I talk to colonels, Ukrainian colonels and generals, that's the impression I get. I feel like, wow, these guys are still stuck in the 80s of fighting, in the Fulda Gap. Like it feels very Soviet. They toe the party line, but that's your opinion must be different because you have actually fought with them. You fought with them before 2022, and you've been with them through this whole war. So you've seen the evolution of mission command, the training, the NATO influence going both ways.
Oh, for sure. I mean, when I arrived in 2018, it was very much a Soviet doctrine army. It was still very centralized command. They didn't really they had no value really in senior NCOs and NCOs. The platoon commander, Milot, did a lot. He was the admin guy, the training guy, but by the time 2022 come, I got promoted quite quickly. They were embracing NATO tactics. We were doing joint exercises with Seabreeze. The Canadians were here. We had NATO instructors before the full-scale invasion training Ukrainians. So from 2018 to 2022, I saw this dramatic change in the Ukrainian military, which largely I put down the defense of Mariupol and the success we had holding against overwhelming odds. We didn't have air superiority, and the Russians were outnumbered us considerably. So we held out for 7 weeks because people were able to slot into those positions, because we had senior NCOs that had their value by then, and commanders that understood that, the value of a senior NCO. Back in 2018, you'd get promoted if you were big and you could beat 10 guys up. That's how you got promoted. So all my NCOs and sergeants were huge guys that could control 10 or 15 people, and they would generally do this, do that. And as a former NATO soldier, I just couldn't get my head around this sort of style management. But that all changed by 2022. And that was largely down to the joint exercises. And I'll give you an example. A lot of the POWs that are in place now that were captured in 2022, places like Mariupol, the Russians won't let them go because they know they'll come back and fight. They know the guys that have had NATO training. My brigade, very few have been exchanged out of the brigade. So it is, they do have a caution about that. They know that if they send them back, they're not going to just send back NATO trained and good soldiers back to Ukraine. So they are keeping them, and they've been in the captivity for 3 years. So, they know, I have no question that even, NATO now would destroy Russia if they did anything stupid. We would just run out of artillery shells and missiles in 2 weeks. It's just that sort of NATO has a value. It's a formidable adversary to Putin, and he wants to destroy it. So again, it's alarming when you hear Trump talk about NATO in those aspects of pulling out. It really does set alarm bells ringing that he's doing the same things that Putin wants. So it questions, trust in Trump. We're back to that again. But I have seen that, and I said just before the full-scale invasion, we'll give the Russians a bloody nose, and we have.
Right. So I tried to explain, this is my theory or philosophy, I guess, on the Ukrainian armies. I call it the 7 armies of Ukraine, because they're all kind of different. The territorial defense, the National Guard, regular army, SSO, GUR, the Legion, border patrol is kind of a separate army within Ukraine. they're all different. And if you look at how the territorial, for example, territorial defense is trained and equipped, completely different from the regular army, from the brigades. They've got older weapons. They rely almost completely on whatever region they come from for supply and equipment and personnel. And how do you describe it? How do you look at it? Being someone that's actually been there and worked with all the different units and different armies, as I call them.
Well, there's a lot down to the battalions and the regiments as such. The funding, like you say, they have a very volunteer culture here. So, generally, the successes we've had in Ukraine are largely down to the start with the volunteers, the volunteer aspect, the communal group. The innovations are done at community level by people who are just putting things together and then get it approved through the government. And groups with money that come up with technical innovations that would help Ukraine. Well, Russia drives that down. It doesn't like people or groups with money or weapons. So this is an advantage that Ukraine has against Russia that Russia doesn't have. So a lot of these innovations with drones are driven by voluntary and businesses and communities within those regions of those battalions and those regiments. So that's one thing, which is a really good thing to have, because I don't know where we would be without that volunteer aspect. Then you've got the battalion itself. You've just had Khatir, which is probably didn't pronounce it right, Khatir, which is one unit that's become the first unit to take a Russian position only using automated services like drones, those robotic dogs, ground buggies, and to the point where they took the position and Russia surrendered. So they didn't lose anybody. I mean, it's like they just used machines and drones to take the position. I mean, that's the innovation, the way forward. That's the way we're going here in Ukraine. So that's really important aspect of it, and that's driven by a unit that's got very good business links and commercial links to commercial businesses, and that's brought into the fold and run by someone who's got military experience, because many have military experience, who are dedicated to defending the sovereignty of Ukraine. You've got the territorial force, National Guard, including Azov here. So who come very, very well funded, but they're an intricate part and part of the military. It's just so different to what you see in the West and NATO, which when I got exchanged in 2022, started talking to the West about this, going, you don't really understand the environment you're working in, or going to, and your budget cuts is like things like, I'm a specialist in SEER, I won't call it a specialist, but having been through SEER training, survival, escape, resist, evade training in America, doing it there, and resistance training not being a thing in Ukraine, I was sort of able to go back and talk to the West and say, when I did my survival training, we used to do a survival element that consisted of learning how to catch food, cook food, where to find it, where to get drinking water, how to do, get through that phase. And then you go on to the next phase, the evasion phase. So they've knocked all that on the head, because in Europe, they're considered that they can get to people within 2 hours. And I was saying, man, I was encircled with a 200-kilometer deep encirclement, and I had 200 kilometers to get to friendly lines before I would ever, and I would need food, water. And it was only that training I did 30 years ago that you've knocked elements of that on the head. You're not dealing with an army with air superiority, who hasn't got air superiority. You're dealing with a Russian army that's got a very capable air force. For us fighting in Mariupol, we were now the Taliban, and we knew that. So I'm able to go back and talk to the militaries and sort of say, you really need to look at this now, because you could be, some of the longest front lines since World War II, and you could be caught behind enemy lines. You need to bring some of that training back. And that's one aspect of Western training that needs to change and evolve. And it was clear when I went back to talk to these people, they didn't really understand the environment they're living in, or what could be working in or operating in. So, and of course, drones aspect of it in 2 years has come on leaps and bounds. What army can teach Ukraine about drone innovation? Not one. Not even the Americans have fought against an army with air superiority. They've got equal air capability, and certainly not the way that drones are being used now. Not even the Americans have fought in a war like that. So, you know, Britain's the same. We're sort of underprepared, really, on how to use drones. And this is where Ukraine are going to be teaching the rest of NATO forces after this. Because if we lose in Ukraine, Russia's going to be the most advanced, dominant army in Europe because it's had 3 or 4 years fighting in modern warfare. And, you know, when's the last time any military in the West has fought like this? So this has got more. This war here has got more in common with World War II in the Ardennes forests than it has, and that's on steroids because now you have cyberspace, you have drone warfare, you have all those additions to what you had in the Second World War. But it's still trench warfare with every part of the front lines monitored. So again, you can't make a move without people on the enemy side knowing about it. And obviously you've got satellite as well included in this now, which you didn't have in World War II. So it's very difficult to even move. So it doesn't matter if they're two Soviet armies very much fighting same for same now. Even if you had an advantage of a Western military, you're still very much in the same position. You can't make a move. Satellite's going to pick up on any movement. Drones are watching you. In fact, we were talking about it the other day that drone warfare now has brought terrorist groups up to the same level as militaries of countries now, which has got people really scared. You know, if you've got a well-funded terrorist unit with a lot of people, they can look at what's just happened in Syria. So, you know, it's got people wondering now. The only thing is with the war in Ukraine is that it's got people like China looking at it thinking, maybe we need more guns, more people, more money, because what we expected to fight Russia with in NATO, really we were underprepared of what we thought we needed. So not only has the West now got to supply Ukraine, it's got to replenish its own stocks and increase those stocks, because look at how many artillery shells that are being fired. Look at how many drones are now being used. Look at how much money is being spent on this war, and it's crippling Russia. We don't talk about that enough, to be fair. So, you know, those units here are different. They work differently. I think the West is starting to understand how Ukraine fights. Again, Ukraine doesn't mind losing ground and pulling people into killing fields, and they can rebuild cities. But as long as they're killing Russians, they're very good at it, and they will keep doing that, fighting their way. And one of the biggest problems that in the early days was that the Ukrainians were coming back after their training in Germany and England, just saying they don't understand what they're fighting, you know. So a lot of that training is now changed, so to accommodate that.
Yeah, so there was just an article yesterday or the day before about in Northern Ireland, some group had used a Mavic with C4 on it and tried to conduct some kind of terrorist operation. And I know you fought in Northern Ireland. You know, you were there. So that technology is going to come home fast for everybody. So you may not be interested in drone warfare, but drone warfare is interested in you. You know, the old Trotsky quote. Yeah, one thing that I was just talking to a friend of mine who is a U.S. artillery officer, and he is dealing with how does he operate under constant drone surveillance now. So how does the artillery, how will they be able to move around and go to a hide spot and then come out and fire and survive when the enemy can basically follow you around all the time? They see you, if you move, one of the principles that I say about this war is if you move, they will see you. Even at night now. Before it was during the day. If you moved at night, you're okay. But now, even at night, even they're going to see you. So, and they're not going to. Let's say they see your, MLRS or whatever it is. They might not attack you directly. They might not attack you instantaneously. They may stalk you using, long loitering surveillance drones, and they'll just follow you around, and they'll get a pattern of life for your entire unit. This is where they resupply. This is their favorite hide spots. This is where they shoot from, and then they return. And then when the moment's right, then they collapse the entire system. So how does the West, before we were only worried about counter battery radar. That's what we were worried about. So you shoot from one place and then you scoot out of there because the counter battery radar is getting a fix on your position. Now it's completely different. Operational security is completely changed.
Again, I can only tell you from my experience that the use of artillery, one, because they're running out of artillery pieces. Two, it hit the logistics. So it's a lot safer for logistics to move. And think of how many drones you could put on the back of a truck and move safely with no explosives on them. But you can move them to the front lines and build those drones and then put the explosives on those drones actually in situ. It's a lot safer logistically to move drones, and you can move more than you can artillery shells. So it makes sense. So the evolution is that close to those front lines is they're not using artillery so much. They're actually using drones. And some of the infantry we've pulled off the front lines talk about days of drone attacks. Not artillery anymore, drone attacks. Just one after another. And if you think about, again, the first round of an artillery round is the most dangerous because when that comes in, you're taking cover. So generally, but drones are accurate, each one. You can put it through a slit in a pillbox. You can put it into the back door of a truck. And now the amount of drones they're using are going after individuals. So for every one drone you see, there's 3 loitering in the background, one with a camera and ready to go. So there's a lot more emphasis on drones now, which are obviously harder to spot taking off. And obviously, if you're on the receiving end, harder to detect. So ECM is going to be, electronic countermeasures are going to be a real development. You're talking about, I think it's called Dragon's Breath or Dragonfire, the new laser that's coming out. I could see those being retrofitted on vehicles and tanks like a phalanx is on a ship eventually, once they nail that down. That's the way it's going. When I joined the army, we didn't even have phones, and now we're looking at Terminator from 1984. With drones hovering 10 feet above the ground, and robotic dogs, and I mean, this stuff is like fascinating to watch if you're interested in this, because these developments are now battlefield changing. I mean, Ukraine's now looking at building submarines, unmanned submarines that can take out unmanned drones that can take out submarines. Innovating that way, and so it's just fascinating to watch because now when they do use artillery, it's a shoot and scoot. They've got about 3 minutes from when they fire to then move and take the gun out. So before they're detected. And that's if they're not seen in advance. So, your days of just lining up 3 or 4 artillery battery in a wood line, those days are numbered to a degree. Now it's shoot and scoot and using artillery as snipers, essentially, So you've got to be really careful. And like you say, my job in the British military when I used to work in Ireland and counter-terrorism was pattern of life. I mean, it's easy to build. That's something we taught Ukrainians when I came in 2018, who didn't really do that. They were solely reliant on electronic apps and shooting apps, and it was all gizmos, and we were back to basics. So we've got a long way to go before we teach you to really be a sniper. And even the role of a sniper now is really out of commission as such. Firstly, if you're fighting in trenches, you'd be lucky if you get a line of sight over 1,000 meters. You're shooting at 400 or 500 meters apart, sometimes close to distances. And anyone who's been in the military know that's a hobby shoot, you know. So unless you're in built up areas where you've got a fighting chance, then the sniper role is just dead. So I get a lot of inquiries of people coming out, I want to do what you do, I want to be a sniper. And I'm like, have you seen the news for the last 2 years? You know, you go and lie in a field and you'll just be hit by a drone with thermal at night. You know, it's even with a blanket and, you know, they'll see you better at night than you will do through the day. So, you know, I wouldn't want to be in the military now. I've retired because we're still finding out those best practice drills to stop drone attacks, you know?
Yeah, it's you mentioned the sniper, you know, the evolution, even the most basic military function, which sniping or sharpshooting is probably one of the most fundamental, you know, functions of a military individual. We talked about Izum earlier before the podcast. I was in Izum with snipers, and they said, we do not want 50 cal Barretts because they shoot too far and they're too heavy. And we never get a line of sight that's farther than 700 meters. Why are we going to use a Barrett? And so they said they want 308 Winchester, you know, and that was their sniper rifle of choice. And you talked about Interflex, and I was in Germany about 2 months ago, training with the Ukrainians, and they were all using 308 sniper rifles. They didn't use any Barretts, so they let me shoot.
I mean, they're pretty good.
German model.
They do everything here. So I mean, they do unconventional stuff. So one of the pitfalls of NATO standards is you're regulated and you can't do anything outside of those standards. Here it's slightly different. I mean, they will put optics on AK-74s, and you just think, what? You know, what do you do? Because they're shooting from trench to trench. What they realise is that they know that if they put an optic and mount it onto an AK-74 and zero it, they've got a better chance of shooting the enemy than with iron sights. So that, you know, you'll see all these rigged up weird contraptions that when you're in the Western military, you're just looking at it when you come over and go, what? You do what? You know, it's sort of a lot of out of sorts to what we used to in the West. And that's come through from really fighting, you know, fighting for 10 years since 2014 in those trenches. They taught me a lot about how to fight in trenches. I mean, my defense exercise when I was in was probably about 2 or 3 weeks. We had the theory, and then we had to dig some trenches, and then somebody rolled over the trenches in a fake attack. You know, it was pretty poor. But, you know, when I came here, I thought I came with all these NATO standards. And what I taught them about NATO standards and tactics, they taught me about survival and living in trenches. You know, how to build a solid foundation, a trench position, how to live off the land to supplement your logistics. There were no MREs. I saw very little MREs in my time here. It was about local produce, sourcing local produce, where to catch it, and they're very good. It's a very soldiers here know how to cut wood, and you know, and they would laugh at me when I went my job to cut wood. I'd buy my wood from the petrol station for the last several years. I can't remember how to cut the basic job of wood, you know, so they would just laugh at me. They would, watch the English guy cut wood, you know, and I'd be like, and they'd be mowing through it like a beaver, you know. So, you know, they know how to fillet fish and catch food and where to get it and supplement the income. They know all that stuff that when I was in, I don't know any soldier in my platoon who knew how to do all that stuff. You know, it was so there's a lot of learning to be done from Ukraine of fighting in this war that militaries need to really understand at a basic level.
Yeah, you talked about putting sights and stuff on AK-74s. I think one thing that I found interesting coming from a Western army was that you can go to the military supply store in any frontline city, like one of the war cities in Kharkiv or Dnipro or Zaporizhia, and you just go down and you want a red dot, you just buy a red dot and you slap it on your rifle, whether that's a AK-47, AK-74. There's no standardization really. And in the Western military, you don't do that. You're not allowed to go have your cousin.
No.
Amazon.com you a red dot and you just slap it on and you build your kit from scratch, basically the way you want it. That's something I thought was interesting, being around the guys in Ukraine, is that everything, sniper scope, glass, just go to the military supply store and you can buy it. You want a red dot, you just go and buy it. You want level 4 Kevlar plates, you just go and buy it.
Just go buy it.
Have somebody from you. Yeah. And then that's your kit. So
there are some similarities. When I was if you wanted better kit, you went to the shop and bought it. And there were certain shops like Silverman's when I was in that you could get some better camouflage and better ripstop and than the issue gear, better boots. But you couldn't buy plates and optics like you can here. But essentially it's the same sort of thing, but they're buying all this gear, but they're learning. So generally they're adapting. So if they're in a position, they've got one set of gear, and then if they're going to do something else, they'll change, and they know how to change the rigs and change the site and what they need to do another job, which you just don't get in that in Western. It's so rigid in Western militaries that, that you when you come here, like one of the guys, I was taught to move with a big Bergen with those jet packs on the side that you go through with 100 litre pack with all your gear in. And this guy, you remember one of these war films where he's going to strip that off, get that off, do this. I did 9 years in the British military, and I thought I'll come over with all this stuff. And they were like, strip this off, take that off, you don't need this. And I was like, but I've done 9 years, and I went to Bosnia, and they were going, you don't need this, don't need that, you don't need this, take these jetpacks off. And when you understand that if you've got a bag, weight will kill you here. So you're just going out in one set of clothes, you're living in that for 2 weeks, you're taking your ammo, just a spare bit of food, and you're going with a day sack, like a small, with ammo and spare gear and a pair of socks. And you're going out for 2 weeks with that. There's no luxuries. And those jetpacks that you're on the side, if you're going to get through some of those trenches are just a little bit wider than your hips. So, and the further you get to the front, they drop. So they're not standard size trenches. So you've got to get through those trenches super fast. So that's why you see a lot of videos with the guys. When you see the videos, they've not got much gear. They've got ammo pouches, nothing on the side. They've got to slip through those trenches quite quickly and get through them. So there was a lot of learning that I had to do when I got here. And that's why I did quite well in Ukraine military. I had a more successful career in the Ukrainian military than I did in the British one, to be fair. Because I was able to develop. Once I learned the language, it sort of opened up for me, really. And I could bring the best of both worlds here, and that got me a lot of respect when I was training people.
Yeah, we were talking to Andrew Perpetua, yesterday. The Ukrainians are interdicting the Russian supply lines to the extent where they can no longer get landmines to the front. So they're making people carry them. And they're like, the TM62 is about 20 pounds a piece. So they're carrying 2 of those, plus everything that they need to survive, because they're not going to get resupplied for weeks. So it becomes an issue. We talked about that for ad nauseum yesterday, on how difficult everything in war is, the friction of war. And then you have to add 40 pounds to what you're already carrying. It becomes ridiculous to a point. So
one of the most dangerous. Sorry.
Yeah.
One of the most
Yeah,
dangerous
go ahead.
jobs now. I mean, it was tank crew member, but now one of the most dangerous jobs here is going for resupply, like you just said. Actually, it's one of the most dangerous jobs now because of all the drones. They just watch, and people take the same paths because of the mine threat. So they go with a clear
Hmm.
path, so you're limited to where you go. So if you go for resupply, the chances of you not coming back are pretty high.
Yeah.
So you know, Ukrainians are able to innovate using drones to drop in resupply, drop in food and ammunition. You know, I don't think the Russians are quite there yet, so they're just getting really smashed in that area. So you can just sit and watch a path, and then somebody will just those videos you see of a soldier running past the tree line. It's because the drone's probably sat there watching this for ages, and then suddenly he's gone to get some oil, some ammunition, or some food. You know, and the drone's already there waiting for him. Off, he's gone. So it
Yeah.
is an evolving problem here with uh, with you know that sort of element. So yeah, logistics is a nightmare here at the moment.
Yeah, and it seems like logistics is that part of the war is changing the quickest, the fastest rate of change right now. When you look at Kursk, some of these places only have one GLOC line of communication in and out of whatever it is. Suja only had one major highway that it wasn't a highway; it was a road that was, uh, asphalted or whatever. But it was just one way in and one way out. And a lot of places are like that. Bakhmut was like that for the longest while. When I was in Krematorsk, those guys, I was with a logistics, not a battalion, but maybe a logistics company. And they were constantly doing runs into Bakhmut, and coming out of Bakhmut, they would get ambushed all the time. One of the most dangerous things. And with drones increasing their range now, drones are back in your, they're in your back area when you're trying to resupply the front area. You can't even have an assembly point where you consolidate your material at this point because they're gonna bomb it. It has to be some kind of decentralized logistics where one guy is bringing a truck of something in and another guy is bringing a truck of something in from disparate parts of the AOR. It's getting chaotic when it comes to resupply. And I think you're
It
right
is.
from what I've read. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, it is. I mean, it's more harder for an advancing army. I mean, I'll give you an example. Pokrovsk, when I went down there in November last year, I was reading the media and they were saying Pokrovsk's going to fall by Christmas, and I was thinking, no, it's not. And I'm there. You know, I was watching it and I was thinking they're 8 kilometers away. They're trying to get to a city with barely enough people to take the city. I'm talking to the guys on the ground. The media are telling me that it's going to fall at Christmas. And again, I was on the internet going, no, it's not. It's like trying to invade East Anglia. It's flat. It's ploughed fields. It's very little cover, small tree lines, and they're coming up to Pokrovsk. They're not going to take this by Christmas because the rainy season's come, the snow's come, you know, just before the snow. I said, they're not going to take it. I mean, you could just, with your basic military head on, when you go to these places, just say it ain't going to happen. Where are we at? It's now May. They still haven't taken Pokrovsk. They're now flailing. Their attack levels have gone down. It's everything as a military mode. You would know that's not going to happen because, Ukraine went into Kursk and they had to redirect troops. So that took a lot of troops away from those areas that they wanted to take because now Ukraine had entered, essentially Russian territory. But, it just wasn't going to happen. So you read a lot of this media hype, and I'm sitting here looking and going, that's not going to happen. That's not, and I'm not a general, but I'm here talking to the guys on the ground, position commanders sort of saying, the guys going, I can't believe they're going to, it's not going to happen. We've put so many defenses. When I was there, they moved half the citizens out of Pokrovsk and started to build defenses. And the reason they do that is because they don't want any of their citizens there to watch them do it. So, they've moved them out. So, we knew then
Yeah.
it wasn't they weren't gonna give up Pokrovsk and weren't gonna take it. And here we are now. They're still fighting over that area and making small gains for losses of quite a few people. And the will to fight's still there. So, I don't put too much stock into the media at the moment here. I certainly wouldn't be here if I was worried about, the lines breaking and Russia breaking in. Personally, I don't think Russia can take Ukraine militarily. And that's the problem you've got now.
It looked, 9 months ago when Russia was approaching Pokrovsk, it looked pretty grim because I was thinking once these guys get within 5 kilometers of that place, 6 kilometers, well, then they're going to just start flattening with artillery. And lo and behold, drones, just about that time, drones started to reach out 15, 20 kilometers, FPV drones. And I think that really helped the Ukrainians defend Pokrovsk, because now you can't push that. You can't push 152 artillery up and shoot from 15 kilometers into the city. It'll be destroyed. And we've seen that. Russia's lost a lot of artillery in the last 6 to 8 months.
And we've also got more aircraft as well, more pilots, more aircraft, more Mirages, Gripens being trained, more F-16s in. It's getting incredibly harder for Russia to make any more advances in those sorts of areas. What we need is more Patriots, more electronic jamming equipment. But again, that's coming on. I mean, Zaluzhny was right back before he left. Was that it's going to be technical advances eventually that make the difference in this war, and he was right then. And we were saying it, he was right then. It's going to be that, and Ukraine are streets ahead with innovation, and the Russians are now using donkeys to bring up mines and electronic equipment. So they are struggling. But what astounds me is how the British media just doesn't report on Ukrainian successes as it does Russia. You have to start asking questions why. And I think that we had a saying here, all they want Ukraine to do is just die quietly. That's what, Ukrainians, we were saying, because they just didn't like the fact that we were putting up a fight and we were fighting, and if you were here like me, you would have seen that attitude, that fight. We're not going to lose this one because we know it's going to be, even Russian intelligence miscalculated their in their invasion of Ukraine and Kiev, and thought they were going to come running with open arms to Mother Russia. Even they got it completely wrong. So, you only have to be here 10 minutes to see the fight and the will to fight and the need to fight and the will to defend their sovereignty, that this isn't going to end quickly.
I think the fascination with Russian success on the battlefield may stem from the underpinning idea that Russia is huge and Ukraine is still small and they're still struggling. And anytime Russia has some kind of success, even if it's costly meat wave success, Avdiivka, for example, even when it's very costly, there's always that chance that this is the moment for Russia where they're going to break through. This is the moment where Ukrainian lines are going to collapse. And so I think the fascination with Russian success is there's still this underpinning feeling like you've got this huge wave of idiot zombies, but they're still coming. And when is the levee going to break? And that's why people are so fascinated with, okay, once Vuhledar fell, that entire corner of the front will collapse or something like that, for example. And I think, at least from my perspective, when I watch Russian success, I'm always like, okay, is this it? Is this the straw that breaks Ukraine's back? Because even Ukrainians will admit that they're in sort of a precarious position. They're always fighting Russia. They're always 24/7. They have to be on their guard. Where Russians are just these idiot zombies that just move forward slowly and die. They're not on pins and needles. Oh, I hope the Ukrainians don't take St. Petersburg. Like that kind of mentality.
Very much so. I mean, they are bad, extremely bad at some things, but they are good at others. I mean, they're very good at using the internet now, and one thing that doesn't get talked about much is the partisan activity, the pro-Ukrainians that are in the occupied territories. I mean, it doesn't get mentioned. We hear about it more here because we're here, but there's a very strong partisan activity. It just doesn't end with occupation. The Russians can't even send their troops for R&R in Mariupol or Berdyansk anymore without them getting poisoned or blown up and then not coming back. So they've stopped all movement there. So that and that's so bad over there that Russia are now talking about bringing the death penalty into the occupied territories. I mean, there's no communications iron curtain. We know exactly what's going on over there because many people have got family still, and Russia's connected to Ukraine so much. So, we know the inflation. We know there's been 140% inflation on some basic goods. I mean, if you're talking about a family, this average earnings is probably $800 a month, and 3/4 of their salary is now being spent on food. It's having a real detrimental effect on Russia in, those areas. So we know that because we talk again, it gets underreported. So, and again, Russia's exceptionally good at using the poor in society through social media, and now have resorted to suicide bombers, which they can, they contact the people that need money, their next fixed, an alcoholic, a local criminal, and they will do anything for a set fee. So they don't realize they're being put into a cell where someone makes the bomb and then someone has to transport a package and then they watch it on a GPS and then they blow it up. And the person that was just meant to be transporting a package was now a suicide bomber. That is just ISIS tactics. And that's what the FSB, the Russians don't have a moral bar and they're exceptionally good at exploiting that. If you can do it here, you could do it in the UK, you can do it in Europe. You can do it anywhere. So, the old days of espionage, spies, and, it's gone. Now it's about recruiting a drug dealer for $200 to transport something to a facility that he thinks he's taking a package. It's not, it's a bomb made by another cell who's been paid $1,500 to make it. That's where we're at with it. I don't think the West really understands that we're at war already with this going on. And FSB are exceptionally good at that, but so is the SBU. Look at what they're doing in Moscow at the moment, the successes they had. They've got, SBU have got agents going around Moscow blowing up generals, high-ranking generals. Again, it gets really underreported because, it's another thing that just doesn't really, a success that really doesn't go down through or palatable in the West, we should say. But you're a country at war. But if you could do that in Ukraine, you could do that in France, the UK, Germany, and that's where Russia's excelled at, really. One of the biggest threats in Dnipro at the moment is recruiting the lower dregs of society, who, like I just explained, who are just torching military vehicles because they'll do it. Kids often, young lads who just want to get $500 for torching a military vehicle. They get it on video, send it back, they send them money. So, it is like that now. You've got to be exceptionally careful, but not so bad in Ukraine as it is in the occupied territories in Russia at the moment.
Yeah, the gray warfare that is going on as we speak inside of Europe is just fascinating to me. How the European response has been basically to ignore it. Basically ignore the assassinations, ignore whatever they've been doing to cargo aircraft, ignore whatever Russia has been doing to the undersea cables in the Baltic Sea. Let's just put our head in the sand, get through this war, and then get cheap Russian petroleum back flowing into Germany and France. I feel like that has been the attitude of the Europeans since the beginning of this war. When do we get back to business as usual with the Russians? And it's sad.
Exceptionally,
if we could, can we talk about your time as a POW just shortly? I think some people that are listening to this may not know your backstory or may not realize that you were captured in Mariupol in the beginning of the full-scale invasion. You were with the 36th Marine Brigade. Is that correct? And you were a Russian POW for almost 8 months. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I was deployed on a routine deployment in December of 2021. The invasion happened in February 24th, 2022. So I was in the trenches 2 or 3 months before the invasion through the winter. So I was already a bit tired by then. But then I literally, when the invasion happened, I was on a routine deployment. It was my fourth on the front lines. I was working the last 6 months of a 3-year contract to get my residence from residency to citizenship. So I thought, giving back to the country that I wanted to retire in with my wife, and for citizenship, I thought that was a fair exchange. I'd done 9 years in the British military, so and I got put through. So I was like the first foreigner to jump as a Ukrainian soldier and pass all their parachute training. So I did like 9 jumps. I passed their beret test. I was put into the Airborne Assault Brigade of the Marines, so like the top tier pinnacle, at the age of 46 or 45 or whatever it was then. So I was jumping out of Mi-8 helicopters and loving it. I loved the military. So I was super fit in my mid-40s, doing all this stuff I was doing when I was in my 20s, and thoroughly loved it. And then I became a section commander. I was the first real international with the Ukrainians to command a position on the front line. So I'd worked my way up to sort of Master Sergeant, and then the invasion happened. So then I fought for Mariupol in 7 weeks, and I was captured on April the 13th. Once the Russians had encircled us, I was trying to break out. We had the choice of either surrendering or breaking out, and I opted to break out, and I was captured about 2 hours outside Mariupol.
Well, now I read your book, Live, Fight, Survive is the name of your book. I read it a year ago when I first met you, I guess, virtually, and we talked. So it's been a while since I read it, and I bought it on Kindle, which is always a mistake because I like to make little notes and stuff in the margins. But the thing that stuck out of the book for me, that I still remember this, is not how much you were starved, electrocuted, beaten by the Russians. I think you were stabbed in the leg like the first day you were captured.
Yeah.
The first early in your capture, they stabbed you in the leg, which that can be deadly just on infection if the way you guys were treated. The thing that stuck out the most was when you were going to be released, and they were taking you by land transport truck to Rostov-on-Don, out of the occupied territories in Ukraine. You guys were in that truck. Everybody was in there together. There was like, I don't know, 8 of you guys, or how many were packed in that truck. They wouldn't stop and let you go pee, and nobody wanted to pee on each other. So you guys held it for how many hours? Like a day? You didn't pee for like a day?
We set off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon through till 10 o'clock the next morning on the back of a truck.
No. And you had to hold it the whole time. That would, for me, that was the most
it was extremely hard,
uncomfortable thing. And you didn't know you were being released at that point. You're on a truck.
No.
You don't know anything, right?
Yeah. I tried to keep the gallows humor. I tried to keep the gallows humor in the book, because that's what really soldiers use to process a lot of the bad shit that happens, and we still use it. I mean, I get upset, and it's when I talk about it, and I get upset at the right times. But generally, when I meet the guys now afterwards, we're like, do you remember that time when we got beaten up and we went for that shower and we got thrown down the stairs when we was in there? And Brahim sort of said, I think I'll skip the next shower day. It's like those things you remember, and people look at us, think, what? But it's our way of processing what's happened, and keeping that humour is essentially. So the bit you described where John's sitting on top of me saying, I need to go for a pee, and I said, if we get out of this, you'll always be the guy that pissed on me, and he just said, you better hold it, and it's those conversations, it was really important to bring those into the book and acknowledge the fact that those things did happen. So it was writing the book meant that I had to get everybody's acceptance that, I wasn't making up trivia crap. It was, those things did actually happen,
Sure. Now, when you were captured, that was before you knew anything, or the world knew anything about Izum, about Bucha, Irpin, even the stuff that happened inside Mariupol, the stuff that happened to the POWs after Mariupol when they bombed that facility north of Mariupol. When the Russians bombed their own POW facility and blamed it on the Ukrainians, a Black Flag operation, killed a bunch of Azov guys, if I remember correctly. The Russians just blew them up, just POWs.
Yeah, they got transferred to our prison in Makivka, actually. Some of those did. So we knew the story, and the guys pretty much said that there was a big. The Russians couldn't control the amount of POWs that were in that camp, and there was a fracas, and they made the decision to cull them. And the guys said that they just put a bomb in one of the rooms, and literally the bomb went off, and they blamed it on an airstrike or an Ukrainian artillery.
Yeah.
So we actually spoke to the guys at that prison. Yeah.
So you didn't know of any of that stuff when you were captured.
Not at the time.
Yeah. I guess my question is, knowing what you know now about how evil and just mindless the Russians are, would you have done it differently? At this point, if you were about to be captured by the Russians, would you just, what advice would you give to Ukrainians when they're about to be captured by the Russians? Just go down with the ship, just go out fighting, don't get captured? Or what advice do you give to Ukrainians now about Syria type stuff?
The initial capture is always the most dangerous. Eventually it does get easier when, it can be debatable, but the initial capture is the most dangerous because one, it only takes someone, you could have killed 6 of their friends in the battle or the fight, and someone just comes up with an anger, just wants to shoot you. That's the unpredictability is the scariest thing. If you make the decision, I come with 13 years experience. I knew exactly if I was to be captured, what was going to happen to me. I'd lived out here 3 or 4 years before the invasion. I knew what to say, when to say it. I knew that I might have some value. I was never going to get through a filtration process. I knew that my Suzik, my Russian-Ukrainian mix, would be picked up instantly because I speak Russian with a London accent, so it's still I'm going to picked up. I'm going to get picked up. So there wasn't any point hiding it. I knew it might have some value. So if I was ever cornered, you've got to have a plan. So I planned to surrender if I was cornered to Russian officer if I could. But it never went like that, really. But one of the things that stuck, it was the best thing, was telling them I was British. I think it saved my life because essentially I'm withholding information about me working with National Guard and specifically Azov. That's definitely saved my life on the front line because I could have been shot in a car park. So you've got to have a plan before you get captured. You can't really decide when you're going to get captured. I actually felt really positive after Mariupol when it was breaking out that I was now the master of my destinies. I've got to get out. I've got to get back. I knew what I had to do, and I knew my task and I'd had training in it, so I felt quite confident. I was absolutely gutted when I was captured by Boyzone. The that's People's Republic version of Boyzone, who were about 19, 20 years old. Some of them couldn't even grow facial hair. And my pride took a bit of a hit. But generally, if you're outgunned out now, you don't really have a choice. I literally walked within 30 meters of a position in broad daylight, trying to just gauge where I was and avoid the drones. So it was the only bit of open ground I had to cross, and I got captured. So you can't, but it certainly helped me knowing my training was in America at Fort Lewis, Washington State, and I did my SEAL training there. So it hadn't changed in 30 years. The tactics, the interrogation, what to expect, the different stages, none of it had changed. I mean, it was so remarkably familiar to what I was taught that things were coming back to me, while I was in captivity. I've got to do this. And internally, your intelligence gathering becomes more astute anyway, because you can't see anything from then on. It's all down to hearing. So even like with a hood on, I could work out that if I was in a place with a dirty floor and people had dirty boots, I was in a more dangerous place than a place where someone had sharp pressed combats and shiny boots and shiny floors cleaned, because at that place they had structure. That place I knew that I was less likely to die because somebody was responsible for me. But every time I got taken to a place where it was shitty floor and a hole and people looked like they'd just come off the front line, I was liable to get a really hiding, electrocuted and beaten and stabbed. And so you start to pick up on those things very quickly and gauge the situation. And I always loved The Great Escape and, The Longest Day and all those old war movies. So I sort of knew it wasn't going to be the Ritz-Carlton if I was captured, but I could certainly manipulate my situation a bit with my captors. So I tried everything I could. And over time, you develop relationships and barter to things and you get food. And, you're going to get pulled. I had great training in propaganda when I was in my SEAL course in America, because that stood me in good stead for when I was captured. And I was in the media a bit beforehand anyway. So when I was thrown in front of the camera, I knew that I wanted the world to know I was still alive. It didn't matter what I said. They were going to, dub it and put, I kill Russian babies, and when I've not said any of that,
Right.
and, I was a Nazi. So I knew from my training that people at home would know who I was, that I wasn't a Nazi, I wasn't a mercenary. I'm married to Ukrainian. I pay my taxes in Ukraine. I never left the country I had legal residency in or legal status in. So, I wasn't a mercenary toppling governments. I'd never left the country or the city I was in. So, I knew people at home would just look at it and go, no, they're lying. That's a load of crap. So you have to have faith and hope in that. But it was different for me. I was in my late 40s. You put that a 20 or 19-year-old in that same predicament, he may never come back from that place. So, age has a big thing to do with it as well. And I'm lucky. I wouldn't have changed anything because I'm still here. So I did everything right, did everything I could, and I got home, and they never knew I was in the army or what I did. So really, I had to sort of expand on that and sort of say I was in the British military, but they had no idea I'd worked in counter-terrorism, had SEAL training, worked with covert operations platoon in Northern Ireland, and been to Bosnia. They never really knew any of that. I just said, made myself as boring as possible, to get through it.
Was the idea of escape, did that ever cross your mind? Did you ever come up with a plan B where you're like, we're going to dig a tunnel, we're going to, jump the guards here, worst case? Did you guys ever talk about that, or did it ever cross your mind? Or were you always like, this is impossible, we get it?
Probably not in the capacity you thought of, but generally, I mean, SEAL makes it sound so easy if you're going to get out, but they tell you the stages. So if you're going from A to B, by the time you get to B, it's going to be exceptionally hard to get out. So the chances are is in transit. Well, the Russians know that. I was kept stabbed in the leg to stop me from running anywhere. They knew I might have been someone of interest, so they didn't want me going anywhere. So I had 3 goons on me everywhere I went, and I had to bury my head in someone's lap for every car journey. I was never getting out of that. And once you're in the lion's den, you're never going to get out. I was in a prison inside a prison. You know, not even 3 Chinooks of Navy SEALs could have got me out of there. So, you know, it just wasn't going to happen. So my safest bet, but it did materialize a prison called Makivka 98 97, where over the course of the time of my incarceration, the Ukrainians were getting closer to the prison. So when I got there, there was no artillery being fired into anywhere near our facility. But by the time September came, the Ukrainians had advanced into Makivka about 4 kilometers away, and they were using mortars and tanks to come into Makivka, and they were being fired into the prison. So we naturally thought we could be liberated before we get out. And then we had those conversations about who we would take and who we would leave. Would it be self-preservation, or would we go as a group? And we started to study routes out, which is the best way. And then when we started to count the rounds coming into the prison, we were cheering artillery rounds coming into our prison because they were Ukrainian. We knew they were close. So then we started to, yeah, I know, it's weird. And we were like, the debris was coming through the window, but we were like, yeah, come on. And we'd have our down days where we wouldn't hear anything. We're like praying for them to attack the prison. So, you know, then we started to work out we started to ask, and one of the inmates told us that 4 people in 2000, and I think it was 17, had actually escaped when a round hit the prison walls, and 7 of the people got out. So we knew there was a chance we could actually make it. And I could run 4 kilometers. So, you know, it was doable, and we were just planning this operation and, you know, on how we were going to get out. And that kept us busy, kept our minds busy too. But I think tunnels were out of the equation, to be fair.
It takes a long time. You probably didn't have enough time to dig a tunnel with a spoon.
No.
You know, I was in just north of Lviv, and that is where the Legion, the Foreign Legion, has their basic training camp. And I spoke to a number of the foreigners, and they segregate them, as you know, by language. So the English-speaking foreigners, the Spanish-speaking foreigners, and so there were some Brits mixed in, but the kids, and they were all kids. They were all pretty young. The people that I spoke with. What advice would you have for the 20-year-old that has no idea about warfare, doesn't really know Ukraine, the history of the Cold War, any of that stuff? What advice would you give that kid that's considering coming over to Ukraine and joining the Foreign Legion?
Well, I think, you know, I refer to my book as many internationals that come here as runaways, killers, or believers. Generally, can fit them into those brackets. And really, the only people you don't want are the runaways, because one, they're running away. That's your people from legal problems, drink problems, drug problems, financial problems. They come here, YouTubers, people like that. They're running somewhere where they think they can change their life, and generally those runaways are a real problem because they end up bringing their crap here. And unfortunately, 99.9% of the people that come here I really shouldn't be here. They're not had combat experience. They're bringing all those problems. And I try and tell people, don't come. If you can't speak the language, you don't understand the culture, don't come, because it's extremely hard for you to succeed here. What generally happens if you get one disgruntled international come over, he'll blow up and try and take 2 or 3 with him, saying it's crap, and then they go back and say, well, Ukraine was shit. Well, you come here with no expertise, you can't speak the language, you don't understand the culture, and they'll be the first people in America saying they're not integrating, kick them out. Well, you've just done that by coming to Ukraine. It's quite hypocritical. So 99%, but there is that 1% generally that you won't hear from them. They're not on social media. They just come here and get on with the job. They're special forces guys or ex-military. They know what they're doing, their job. They might not speak the language, but they bring their years of training and expertise in with them. And generally, a lot of people fight to get on teams now. The Ukrainians are getting better at selecting the people they want. So they are getting better at that. But a lot of you guys sit in the second lines and they get disgruntled and they just live in Kiev or Lviv, and it's not what they care. I want to shoot guns, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, what are you on about, and I've got but actually the best guys are the ones that come. So the believers you want to take, and if they've had no experience, I'll take them every day because you can train them, mold them, manipulate. They listen to you and generally are better. And they believe in the cause and they stay longer. The 6 months, years, 2 years, they stay longer and they make the inroads into integrate and they buy into the culture and they understand what you're fighting for. But we get very good at spotting those runaways and those spaceship door gunners and underwater knife fighters that turn up and try and Ranger Danger is becoming having worked with them and been trained by them. It's like when it comes to I was a ranger, really Ranger Danger. We got another one, Ranger Danger. You could just tell. I mean, you just talk to them for 2 minutes and they're just repeating phrases that they've heard somebody else say, and you just, my God, really, But I mean, there are some good guys that come.
The ones I talk to, a lot of them, I get the impression a lot of them think that they're going to come over here and either be special forces, SSO or GUR. They're going to join some elite Omega unit out of GUR, or they're going to be flying drones because they've heard about drone warfare. And guess what? Every Ukrainian male that's under 25 years old, if they're going to volunteer, they're going to volunteer in the drones because they can pick their job if they go to the recruiting center, and they're going to probably pick drones. So they're not going to, once you get here and once the Ukrainians get their claws in you as a foreign legionnaire, you're probably not going to get picked up for either of those jobs. It takes years of training to be, an operator. So they're not going to just throw you in elite units. Even the 3rd Brigade, you'd have a hard time even just getting with the 3rd, Assault Brigade. So I think they really don't understand the war. They don't understand, clearly don't understand Ukrainian culture or politics. And they don't understand the most important thing is probably, and I don't understand this as much as I've been over to Ukraine and with the number of units that I've been with and trying to study the war, they don't understand the construct of the Ukrainian military in general.
No.
And I think that if I had to do one thing to help them out is give them a pamphlet on this is the Ukrainian military. And it's like 10 pages of here's the organization, here's the construct, this is what percentage of the military speaks, like you said, Suzik, Ukrainian, and Russian. Like you're going to get to a unit where maybe one person in that company speaks both Russian and English. And you're going to be
I can tell you a really good story, actually.
Right? Yes,
I'll tell you a quick story. I tell you, I was on a position, and it was my first position as a commander. We're coming to the end of the tour, and this was an education in Ukraine. So I have a translator because I speak a bit, but the guys that were coming in were from the Carpathians, so they were from the mountain brigades. So the commander comes in with his advanced team to my position, and I start talking to him. My translator talks to him. And then the commander talks back, and they're talking for about 5 minutes, and I can hear my translator going, da, хорошо.
He's speaking
okay,
Russian,
da. And then I turned around to my translator, and I said, what did he say? And he said, I don't know, he's from the Carpathians. He's speaking some Hungarian dialect. I have no idea what he's saying. And I just went, what? You're my translator. How am I going to do that? And it was like, I suppose it's like someone from Scotland talking to someone from Louisiana and expecting them to understand each other. It's like, they're two different countries. Probably a bad analogy, but someone from Scotland talking to someone from Cornwall in the UK, and expecting them to understand each other fully. It's just not going to happen, and the Hungarian dialect, Hungarian words and Ukrainian language on the West, and it just became, I remember that just chuckling to myself, and me and him became really good friends after that, because it's like, you're a shit translator. It's like, I'm speaking
the
Russian,
language.
Ukrainian. It's like,
We could talk about the language issue in Ukraine for hours, because it's super frustrating, because I tried to learn Russian and Ukrainian at the same time and I couldn't do it. So I just settled. I'm like, I'm just going to focus on Ukrainian. And like you said, that Ukrainian doesn't always help you when you're in the Donbass. Like I travel around
no.
the Donbass, and as long as I've been studying Ukrainian, I still am not very good at it. Shout out to my tutor, Ira. She does a great job, but I'm not. It's a hard language, and so when I go to the Donbass, I can't. If you start speaking Russian, and I've spoke to Ukrainians, like I said, when I was in Germany on that Interflex tour. I was trying to speak to the Ukrainians, and they only spoke Russian, and they're like, I don't understand what you're saying, because Germans,
Yeah.
that was the language of choice in Germany, because a lot of Germans speak Russian from the Cold War era.
Yeah.
And the way I describe it is Ukrainian and Russian is not like Spanish and Portuguese or Spanish and Italian. It's more like English and Celtic, like the similarities between English and Celtic. Like, just because you speak Celtic or just because you speak English, they're not going to understand you if someone starts speaking Celtic. So it's such a bizarre thing. You could write a book about just Ukrainian language, because you're right. They speak. There's Hungarian dialects in the west of Ukraine. There's Polish, Ukrainian. I think there's some Romanian spots in the southwest that they speak. Close to Moldova, where they speak Romanian. So it's crazy. Hey, let me. I appreciate your time. This has been great. Let me finish on one last question. Are you now a Ukrainian citizen? Because the Ukrainians, as I understand it constitutionally, you're not allowed to have dual citizenship. So once you become a Ukrainian citizen, you have to give up your British citizenship. Is that correct?
Well, I don't think you can give up your British citizenship. I certainly wouldn't do it. I have the opportunity to. I was given a state award, which puts me at a high level anyway, and I think it's one of the highest awards you can get as a non-citizen of Ukraine. So having the Order of Courage gets me some stature in the country, and I've been married 2 years, so I can get my citizenship here anyway. But because it's under martial law, there just really isn't any point. I mean, to get the citizenship here it only allows you to vote. Really, you can get a lot of the same things with permanent residency. So generally, I don't. While the war's on and we have martial law, there's just no point me applying for any of it. But I certainly will get it if I can have the two. And I think Zelensky's put a bill through Rada that's not been voted on yet to allow dual passports. So I don't think it'll be very long before we can get it through anyway. I think there's a lot of scope now that hasn't happened before on internationals that fulfill their contracts who are now getting citizenship here anyway. So I don't think it's a thing. I think it's one of those laws that's just sort of being overlooked a bit. Because there are plenty of businessmen with dual passports, let's be honest with it, and money still goes a long way in Ukraine. So,
right, the golden passports, we do that too. Trump is big on that. Yeah. If you got enough money, enough investment, you can be a citizen. Hey, Shaun, thank you. This has been great. It's great to talk to you again.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me on.
Okay. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you later. Bye-bye.
The Flash Traffic Podcast.